we have a number of issues to raise today. Some are follow-ups and some are issues that took place in Parliament at the last sitting, which we want to emphasize. However, I think we should take note that in closing up the debate on the 2016 budget, that this is a budget that will go down in the parliamentary and political history as the only budget that brought 140 tax measures with increases of 50%, 100%, 600%, and 1,150%. This is a major achievement, I guess, for the APNU-AFC coalition government, because in the Jubilee year, and I think I'm old enough, but I cannot remember any budget that was brought in this period of 140 tax measures at one shot, fired at the Guyanese people. In a situation in which there is increased hardships, with an economic slowdown, which you've all heard about and you all are aware, you live in this country. And so these tax measures are actually unconscionable at this time. However, one of the things that I think one needs to note in the tax measures and the bills that were brought was that there appears to be no remedial measures in regards to the link between paying of your income tax and outstanding arrears and access to services and licenses, etc. So although the tax amendment bill, for example, points out that in 2016 you can get a provisional license for any of the licenses that are listed. However, you have 6 months to clear your outstanding GRA taxes and income tax declarations, etc. However, there's no remedial clause in the bills to do with after 2016 what happens. After what happens. So that, and in addition to we have pointed out that this is going to be a nightmare with GRA. And I just want to give one example. A number of my colleague members have pointed out what it will do to businessmen, taxismen, and so on. And I want to point to another category of people that we probably didn't emphasize enough in the budget, but is becoming clearer and clearer now. And that is those who are outside the threshold completely, who actually do not have to declare and pay income tax. And these are almost 38 to 40,000 people who are outside that net. So one could take anecdotally the horse cart man who has to now pay, I think it is $3,000-4,000 for his license to have a horse cart. And he goes to get his license and the guy says, well, you haven't paid your tax. He's not required to pay a tax. And our laws do not require that you file an income tax declaration or return, even if you're not within the tax net, as in other countries, for example. So this is a nightmare that the bills in the haste, I believe, to bring these measures did not contemplate or ignored the fact that there are 30,000 to 40,000 people who are not within the threshold at all. And how would they be treated when they go to get their licenses? And of course, the situation with sugar and rice continues with enormous consequences for the country. And of course, we will do some follow-up issues now. For example, during the budget debate, we were promised the protocols for Soku. 3 weeks have passed, no protocols. I assume you press people may be better informed than we are, but we have heard that they are promised. They have not been seen. They have not been publicized. We want to emphasize the issues that were also discussed during the budget and subsequently in relation to the recent announcement of the Minister of Housing that she'll go after defaulters who are not occupying the land. And this again is an extraordinary statement on our part in terms of, one, the economic slowdown. So many people we know who have acquired house lots are holding back on building because they don't know which way the economy is going. They don't know what's happening with their jobs and so on. But just as important, and a new development in this, which is very disturbing, is that when we were in government, it took people about 3 to 4 months to get their transport, having paid for their land or their house lots. People are now being told they have 16 months to wait to get their transport. This is a travesty that people have to wait. And in fact, we are getting more and more reports on a daily basis of people who paid prior to May the 11th, 2015, who have gone back trying to get their their transport and have been given the royal push around, and therefore, and as of recently, when they went back probably a third, fourth time, they're now told they have to wait 16 months. Where does the 16th month begin? One isn't sure, but it looks as if it began in February 2016. This is of great concern because this looks as if they're now preparing the ground for seizing land of those who have paid, but who haven't got their transports and haven't been able to build. And again, we point out to the cases that are of political and ethnic discrimination in regards to this, and more cases are coming to light of people who have received letters, again repossessing the land, but they haven't got their transports and have been waiting for months. Again, the issue of corruption and the cleanup campaign of Georgetown and the Durban Park, phase 1, phase 2, or whatever phase we're in, no disclosure. This was raised in the budget debate, as you know, and we were told that in this phase that no money was coming from any from the government coffers. However, Durban Park continues, and we understand the phase 2, or the phase that I assume is leading up to May 26th, would cost the taxpayers money. However, how much, how are the contracts being awarded, who are the contracts being awarded to, what is the design of Durban Park, what are we actually building, or what are we looking at? No one knows. So no disclosure, no transparency. This continues despite, at these parliamentary press briefings, in the parliament, there have been constant calls since November last year to tell us what's going on with Georgetown. We're well aware of which contractors are being given jobs without tendering. And in fact, we also know that prisoners have been brought out to do work on the Durban Park, and yet there are contractors there. So are the contractors, and people are highly suspicious of what's going on, are the contractors charging for the labor and the prisoners are being paid? What are the prison rates? Who knows? When there's lack of transparency, there is much speculation about what's really happening on the ground. Minister Bulkan, during the debate, pointed out that and seemed to indicate that there would be an increase in property taxes in Georgetown when he referred to the need to have a new evaluation of property in Georgetown. The question that Mr. Bulkan needs to ask, is there going to be an increase in property taxes in Georgetown? Right now, Georgetown has the highest property taxes for the entire country, and that was brought in many years ago by the city council. Again, the issue of political and ethnic discrimination and targeting of people. And again, we point to Kwame McCoy and Jason Abdullah, who have to go every day to the Evelary. For what purpose? Just to keep them in check, just to intimidate them, just to have them appear, because the rationale for this is totally absurd and unacceptable. Firing out without recourse to people defending themselves, that continues unabated. So that the most recent firing of Mr. Badri Prasad, for example, I'm using as an example, is that an audit is supposed to reveal whatever it revealed. Who knows? That is also not public, and a person is fired. Again, the case that people do not have the recourse to defend themselves or even to reply. And you may have noticed, and some of you may not have, that in a number of pieces of legislation that were brought in the 2012 period, 2011 period, all included, particularly in relation to removal of people from jobs or from boards or from appointed positions, that they had to be given the opportunity to right to reply and to defend themselves. That's enshrined in a number of pieces of legislation in Guyana, based also on our constitutional provisions. And again, as I pointed out earlier, the repossessing of people's property in housing areas. Again, the issue of lack of transparency and corruption, we pointed out during the budget debate, to do with the contract that appears to have been awarded for fertilizer to the grand tune of $400 million. Clearly, this is a person that has been a financier of the APNUFC electoral campaign. And again, this is a contract that has had no public tendering, etc. This is just one in a lineup of contracts that have been awarded by this contract, by the government, to people who have been politically aligned and or who are connected as financiers of the electoral campaign. And last but not least, on the follow-up issues, is the issue that we continue to demand that the Commission of Inquiry on Walter Rodney be made public. It must be made public. And it is unbelievable that out of courtesy and respect that the widow of Dr. Walter Rodney, Mrs. Rodney, has not been given a copy of the Commission of the report as of a day ago, so that the government has been responding to the Commission of Walter Rodney, but it has not made it public in the press. It has not been able to put it on a website so people can read it. It has not distributed it, and nor does it at this point. There's no indication it has been or it will be laid in the House. So these are the follow-up issues. Now we go to a number of occurrences in relation to what happened in Parliament on February 26th. And there's a little more detail, so I don't want you to lose focus on what are the big ticket issues or the big focus issues that took place prior to, during the debate, and let us look at February 26th. The February 26th, 34th sitting of the 11th Parliament, there are a number of unusual occurrences, so unusual as it points to the root of these developments was in their unconstitutionality. First, the amendment to the Financial Administration and Audit Act was listed in the audit paper for second reading. However, as it was pointed out by the opposition, that this act no longer existed, and Chapter 7301, which it refers to as its principal act, is now the Audit Act. Efforts to have this recognized as a problem that needed to be rectified before the passage of the bill on February 26th. One, because there's no such legislation of that chapter in existence, nor can this be found on the Laws of Ghana website that is under the Ministry of Legal Affairs, nor can this be found in the recent law books, what we call the purple law books. All these efforts failed. Subsequently, we have found that Parts 1 and 4 of the Financial Administration Audit Act, number 39 of 1961, were repealed in the Audit Act 2004, and specifically Section 47 of the Audit Act 2004 provides for the Minister to take actions consequential of the new Act coming into operation with regards to the FAA Act being repealed within a time frame of no longer than 2 years after the new Act came into operation. The Audit Act came into operation on April the 27th, 2005. Most of the audit aspects of the FAA Act were incorporated into what became the new Audit Act for 2004, and one section with regards to taxation appears to have been incorporated under another act, the Fiscal Enactments Amendment Act, which has existed since 1993 and has been amended in 2003, 2005, 2011 and 2013 as a kind of catch-all amendment bill brought to the House usually during budget time to amend several other statutes in one consolidated subsidiary legislation, such as income tax, tax act, motor vehicles, corporate tax, property tax, etc. Therefore, the government erred in refusing to rectify the situation by deferring this bill and bringing it back with the correct reference to an existing principal act. This action reflects both incompetence and arrogance, thus forcing the Parliament to amend an act which no longer exists. The last time the FAA was referred to in the Fiscal Enactments Amendment Bill was in the amendments of 2003. The second occurrence took place during the vote on the Tax Amendment Bill. MP Anil Nandalal, former Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, has publicly exposed and responded to Minister Trotman's letter and statement in the House on February 26, pointing out the constitutional provisions which have been violated in the action of both the Speaker and the government during the passage of the Tax Amendment Bill. A vote was taken at which the government and opposition had 32 votes each when an amendment was put by the opposition to the Tax Amendment Bill. The Speaker ruled that the bill had passed as printed, that is, not amended. Under normal conditions, that clause of the bill, both the amendment and the original, would have been negativized. Therefore, this clause would have had to be removed from the new tax bill as passed in the National Assembly. In looking back at the recording of the sitting on the website of the National Assembly of Guyana, a most tedious, frustrating, and time-consuming exercise, I might say, it is clear that a series of errors occurred, and just like at any major sports event, a resort to the recordings of the specific moments of an athletic or any race or a section of a play by a cricketer or a footballer can lead to clarity in determining the correct results. No doubt it is human to err, but it is also human to rectify wrongs and mistakes made to ensure there is justice. In this case, it was a fundamental provision of the Constitution which was being undermined, and that is the section that all questions in the House must be passed by a majority of votes present and voting. Efforts by the opposition to rectify this mistake in the sitting were ignored and dismissed. The fault was placed at the feet of the opposition by both the Speaker and what appears to be now the Speaker's advisor, former Speaker and now Minister, Mr. Raphael Trotman, for not calling a division. Let us go through a series of the occurrences in the debate on the Tax Act as they transpired. 1. The bill was moved by Minister Jordan, followed by contributions by members Irfan Ali and Anil Nandalal, then closed by the said mover. 2. The Speaker did an unusual thing. Having closed the debate on the bill, he then put the bill in its entirety to the vote. The government voted aye. The bill should not have been put in its entirety at this stage. It is at this stage where the bill is put clause by clause. The opposition was confused that he had put the bill in its entirety when he knew there was an amendment waiting to come up. 3. Due to response of the Speaker to concerns raised by the opposition during this and previous sittings of the 11th Parliament, this one in particular, which pointed to the Speaker making a mistake, was not one that any of us relished raising on the floor. One had hoped that the clerk, who is the advisor to the Speaker on procedural matters, would have drawn this to his attention. 4. At the point when the Speaker put the bill, the Ministers Harman and Dr. Rupert Roopnarine were not in their seats in the chamber. Therefore, the government had 31 persons who voted in favour, and the opposition had 32. The Speaker then proceeded to put the bill clause by clause. So that's number 5. Number 6. Minister Harman entered the chambers just as the first clause was being put to the vote. The government voted aye, the opposition was silent. 7. This repeats with the second clause. 8. On the third clause, the Speaker called on Mr. Nandalal, who had tabled an amendment to propose it, which he did. It was seconded by Mr. Clement Rohi. One must note that there is no need for a seconder when a bill is in the Committee of the Whole. 9. The Speaker called on those in favour, and the opposition voted loudly in favour of its amendment. The government voted loudly against the amendment. 10. The Speaker ruled that the third clause as printed had the approval of the House. 11. Note that Minister Dr. Rupert Roopnarine was still not in his seat in the House. 12. The Speaker then put the entire bill as printed and pronounced that the bill as printed had the approval of the House. 13. He then moved to the next item on the order paper and called on Minister Jordan. 14. It is at this stage that the Chief Whip rose to point out there's a problem with the vote as there are 32 members on each side of the House. 15. The Speaker stated the opposition should have called for division, and since it didn't, there is nothing that he can do. 16. The Leader of the Opposition also rose to seek the Speaker's intervention to correct the mistake, again pointing out that numbers are equal and a law or motion must be passed by majority in the House according to the Constitution and the standing orders. 17. Again the Chief Whip rose and repeated that there are 32 members on each side and calls on him to recommit the bill to the vote. 18. Minister Trotman rose to point out the decision on a vote is based on the loudness of the vote is based on Commonwealth parliamentary practices. 19. The Speaker refused to act on the request to recommit the bill to the vote, nor did he decide to suspend the sitting to examine the issue further and return to the House, having heard the arguments in his office, which has happened repeatedly during the Trotman speakership. 20. He then called on Minister Jordan to proceed with a motion on the Customs Order number 5 of 2016. And of course, Minister Jordan proceeded with moving the item. At this stage, and it is at this stage that Minister Dr. Roopnarine enters the House and takes his seat. It is clear from the video recording that when the Speaker incorrectly put the entire bill to the House, the opposition had 32 seats and the government had 31. Assuming the Speaker acted correctly, then the bill was defeated at that stage. It did not matter that the opposition was silent. The bill did not have the support of the majority of the persons in the House. When the First Amendment were put, the government had 32 and the opposition had 32. But most importantly, when the amendment to the third clause was put, the opposition loudly voted for and the government loudly voted against. The video illustrates that Minister Trotman's statement that the opposition was silent was not true. The Speaker then put it that the clause as printed was approved. Again, both decisions were incorrect. The amendment to the third clause and the original in the bill were negativized, as in both cases there was no clear majority. Here again is where the Constitution was breached, which states that a question before the National Assembly must be passed with a majority of elected persons present and voting. The issue that has been raised on the floor and in a letter to the editor of several newspapers by the former Speaker and Minister Trotman, that the volume of the ayes and nays is what determines the vote. However, this is only applicable in a number of situations. 1. A. In a situation where there is a clear and unmistakable majority, as in the 9th Parliament, for instance, when the then government, had 37 seats and the combined opposition had 29. And B, where the Speaker is in a position to determine that the voice volume reflects the number of actual seats in the House, or actual seats occupied in the House. Erskine May's 23rd edition, pages 403 to 4, Decisions and Divisions, recognizes that, quote, the Speaker endeavors to judge from the loudness and general characteristics of the opposing exclamations. It goes on to say, as his judgment is not final, he expresses his opinion by saying, I think the ayes, or, as the case may be, or the nays have it. But if those declared to be the minority dispute the fact, the Speaker will then say clear the lobby in order to start the process of counting the numbers on each side, which is termed a division. It is clear from Erskine May that neither the House nor the Speaker are considered to be infallible. Thus, provisions are made to correct mistakes and to ensure that any law passed in the House is in accordance with the will of the majority. In the example referred to above, it is the Speaker who initiates the division in order to satisfy a complaint of an incorrect vote or even one that is perceived to be so. In this 11th Parliament, the majority of 33 for the APNU AFC coalition government and 32 for the PPPC opposition, extreme care and vigilance is absolutely necessary to ensure the decision taken by the House reflects the will of the majority seated and voting in the House at that time. Standing Order 48.1 is extracted from the Constitution and contains no ambiguity for interpretation. It states, all questions, quote, all questions proposed for decision in the Assembly or in committee shall be determined by a majority of the votes of the elected members thereof present and voting. When the 34th sitting began, Mrs. Sheila Veerasamy was sworn in as a Member of Parliament. The government had 32 voting members and the opposition 31. On the arrival of the geographic MP Alistair Charlie, whose flight from Letham had been delayed several hours, the opposition had its full complement of 32 voters. It appears that it is at this point that Minister Dr. Rupnarayan was hurriedly sent for and arrived in time for the vote on the Firearm Amendment Bill and the amendment to that bill by the opposition. Therefore, the government side was fully cognizant that they were in a pickle with one vote short early on in the sitting and took steps to rectify the situation. Without that one vote, all the bills were at risk of being negativized unless they had the support of the opposition. It is interesting to note that the government did not do anything when they knew they had only 31 and later only 32 voting members in the House during the voting of the tax amendment bill. Yet the seats which were empty were next to the government chief whip. Clearly the government were of the view that they could get away with this travesty, and the sad thing is that they did. When the opposition protested what had transpired with the tax amendment bill, the government members sat there fully cognizant that they only had 32 members in place. Yet they indignantly protected this dishonorable and illegal act. In retrospect, one can wonder if the saying once a rigger, always a rigger holds water here. When the chief whip for the opposition as a final gambit presented an option to the Speaker to recommit the bill to the vote, this is something that is not unusual in Commonwealth parliamentary practices, by the way. She was fully aware that were he to have accepted her proposal, that he would have rung the bell, and wheresoever the mystic minister Rupert Rupnarayan was, he would have pressed to appear to vote for the government regardless of what the issue was. This option had it been considered by the Speaker, the opposition, although ending up with the same result, would have felt more confident that the Constitution and parliamentary practices and procedures would have been preserved and would be honoured then and in the future. It would also have demonstrated to the public that the highest lawmaking body would uphold the Constitution and could acknowledge it had made a mistake and be principled enough to correct them. Sad to say, this did not happen on February the 26th, 2016, at the 34th sitting of the Parliament. So I hope that we have given you quite a number of things to chew on and to be able to raise questions on. So I'd like to open the floor, please. Yes?
For them are views, especially just point out several instances where things have gone wrong in the National Assembly.
Yes.
Does the PPP still have confidence in the Speaker, Mr. Scotland, to carry his mandate according to the law?
Whether you have confidence or not is really not a matter that will make any difference right now. We're extraordinarily disturbed by the Speaker's process of decision making and reactions to the opposition members. We find it disrespectful and belittling the way he speaks to our MPs, including the Leader of the Opposition. And this is not going down well. So that, because I've sat in Parliament for a long time and I've always seen speakers, even those appointed by the PPP, show great respect to both the Leader of the House and the Leader of the Opposition. I am very concerned about the direction which this Parliament is going, the 11th Parliament. We are early in the days, but already, as we pointed out at several press briefings, we're disturbed about these developments that we're seeing unraveling in the Parliament. And as I'd said at the very beginning in August 2015, and I called on the Speaker, Dr. Scotland, to make his own legacy and to be his own man as Speaker. Well, I guess that's what he's doing. Maybe. Historians will decide that. But our job as elected officials, and we keep reminding the House that the so-called 4,500 votes that is the difference between the two parties is less than an entire seat for the whole House. If you get elected to the House, you have to get much more than 4,500 votes. And that this cavalier treatment of an opposition where there's actually less than one seat different in terms of percentage, but clearly one seat difference, is one that's unacceptable. So that we will continue, though, to point out we are there at the behest of the people of this country, whether they voted for us or not, and we'll continue to fight. And we'll continue in the parliamentary forum to fight for our rights, to defend the Constitution, and to fight for what we believe is right for the Guyanese people. We're not going to be cowed at all. We're not going to be cowed. So if these attempts at belittling and in sarcasm and these decisions which are mind-boggling sometimes in terms of parliamentary practice, they're not going to intimidate us from doing what we know we are entitled to do and we have a right to do in the Parliament of Guyana.
Does the PP intend to take any legal action regarding these issues?
Beg your pardon? On the tax bill?
On the others?
There are considerations, and those are being examined. These will be examined by the legal persons in the party and in the opposition. These are matters that have to be decided on. Yes.
Would the PPP need to exercise its right to nuclear confidence motion against the Speaker?
At this point, I think that will not be something that we would do. We would lose it. It's still a one-seat difference. The issue of if one goes in that direction has to be very specific and particular developments. I don't think we've reached that point. I'm not saying that we may not reach that point, but we haven't reached that point yet. And we believe that there is still the opportunity for the Speaker to do what is correct, and that is to uphold the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution in the National Assembly and to uphold parliamentary democracy. And we still believe that that hopefully that the calls of the PPP and the parliamentary opposition, as well as civil society who's watching on, and people who are not necessarily supporters of the PPP are not happy about some of these transgressions in the 11th Parliament that they are observing. Remember, we have live streaming. People are seeing this not only in Ghana but overseas. So that's the greatness about the information age. There's greater disclosure and transparency. And so we believe that the road is still, there's a road ahead that's going to be long and hard, and we're prepared to fight it. And we're going to fight it at every level. Yes, I think you had a question. Yes.
What would be your definition of belittling?
Of the what?
Of belittling. When you say that the Speaker belittled the leader of the opposition and members of your party, can you be more specific?
Do you sit in Parliament?
Yeah.
And do you think that the sarcasm is not a form of belittling? My mother used to say sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. It's the lowest form of wit. And therefore sarcasm in particular is a form of belittling someone.
But
I'm not giving you specific examples. You're there. But you are quite aware that the issues of the sarcasm that is quite frequent. Sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. And it is a means of belittling people. It always is. It always is to make a person feel out of place or that they have gone out of place. And I'm sure if you ask your mother about that, she'll explain that to you very well. Because mothers are experts on sarcasm. But we believe that the way in which we are treated many times, that we are not listened to on simple matters that require correction. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. And it isn't that it hadn't played in the Parliament before. But this shut down arrogance of the government on its part, and that seems to have the cooperation of the Speaker on these matters. How could he not have seen that who was not in their seat when the bills were being voted? There's a reason why the Speaker's chair is always higher than everybody else's. It's to have the panorama view. That's one of the reasons for it.
Javon Vickery, NCN News, is back in the same question. The Speaker might have overlooked it, but the bigger question is, why didn't the People's Progressive Party bring it up at that point, rather than waiting for other bills to pass and then bring it up?
We didn't wait until after other bills. If you'd listened to what I said, I gave you the chronicle based on the video. And the bill we didn't wait for other bills to pass and then come back to it. When the Speaker moved, that the Minister moved to the customs motion, we got up at that point. And so on, that's when we tried to correct it. And this a view of both the Speaker and Mr. Trotman, as I said, who is the advisor to the Speaker, that onus is on us to call a division. I've quoted from Oscar and Mais. Ultimately, the Speaker has to rectify if there's a perception of a wrong that has been committed. And the British Parliament has a different thing. First of all, we have a constitution. The British Parliament Britain does not have a constitution. We are like the Americans, we have a constitution. Our supreme law is the constitution. In the UK, the Parliament is the supreme body. So completely different systems. However, we are a hybrid system of Westminster and Republican. And so whilst we're an executive president and an executive that has certain powers that are Republican, at the same time, on a Republican model, we have in the Parliament, we have brought in the Westminster aspects and Commonwealth parliamentary practices. So that in their system, if you read Erskine May's, and it's a big thick book like that, it's in the Parliament, you can ask to borrow it, and that is that once there is a dispute over a vote, of what they call the voice vote, right? Because it's based on what you hear. Once a dispute on that, any member can raise it. The section I wrote, and why they say clear the lobby, is because at that point, the Speaker calls a division. And they have a system where the ushers become the tellers, as they call them, and the opposition are put in one room, the fors and the against are put in two different rooms, they count it there, and they come back with the tally. We don't have a system like that. The system first is on the floor. You then vote, which is more transparent, I believe, because everyone can see what you're voting. So this view that, because the opposition, so the Constitution was violated and the opposition is at fault. This is a Pontius Pilate approach. It's totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. And if the media buys it, I'm sorry. If the media buys it, I'm really, really sorry about the level of what's going on in this country. The Speaker is there in the House to uphold the Constitution and laws of this country. The clerk is there as the advisor to the Speaker in relation to parliamentary practices, procedures, conventions, etc. Based not only in the Guyana Parliament, but other parliaments. Because there are areas which are grey, which have to be gone into when you look at other models and other practices, including what are court cases to do with parliaments that are taking place in the modern world. And so the opposition role and the government role are clear as well. Both roles are clear. And you're telling me the Constitution has been eroded and violated in full face of 71 people sitting there, and that no one must do anything. The Speaker says, I can't do anything, it's your fault. Trotman says, we can't do anything, it's the opposition fault. And we're willing to accept that? We're willing to accept that as Guyanese? How could that be? The Speaker, if he wasn't sure what to do, which has happened over and over again with Speakers, whether it was Derek Jagan, whether it was Martin Zephyr, whether it was Ralph Ramkran, whether it was Trotman, and Mr. Scotland has not done it so far, from the time he came in June to now, but certainly it was used by other Speakers. When they're confronted with a situation and not sure of what to do, and the standing orders to them are not clear, they call a suspension, they go in their room, they call the representative of the two parties, and they discuss it. Speaker says, go out my room, make a decision, come back and make a ruling. That's how it's done. But to flat out, to say to the opposition, it's your fault you didn't call a division, when knowing full well, it is the Constitution must be upheld. You cannot pass a bill according to the Constitution and the standing orders, and the standing order lives completely from the Constitution, that nothing can be passed in that House without the majority of the elected members. Notice again the issue of elected members. Therefore, the issue of technocrat people are not elected members. And all those physically present and voting. Physically present and voting. So, Mr. Trotman saying that Mr. Rupnarayan is in the MP lounge, who knows? And who cares? His job was to be in the House. And even Mr. Harman nearly got caught. Because the door shows in the video Harman coming through the door as the Speaker puts the vote on the first clause of the Tax Act. And he jumps into his seat. So Harman knew that he had to get into the House. I don't know where Dr. Rupnarayan is, and it's not my problem. It's not my issue. That's an issue for APNU and AFC in terms of their MPs. But what it is an issue for the Speaker is that a bill cannot pass with equal votes. An amendment cannot pass with equal votes. It must have a majority. That's it. That's it. So, as I said, I pointed out in the time when he puts the bill in its entirety wrongly, in fact, the bill was defeated. because it didn't have the support. They had 31 and we had 32. And when he put it back with the clauses, the amendments, in fact the entire bill, could not go through because it was 32-32, whether we opened our mouths or not. But we voted on our amendment for it. And all of that would have disappeared. So that the issue that we didn't call a division is a ruse. It's just an attempt to get egg off their faces, you know. And so, if that's how they want to play ball, we can also go to the rules and the Constitution and the parliamentary practice and show that they're talking utter nonsense, and it's unacceptable, you know. Okay. Any other questions? I hope that the media will try to help us, help the Guyanese people, not help us, the parliamentary opposition, in terms of finding out more about this Durban Park.
Actually,
How much is it costing? What's the design?
There's a design.
Well, I don't doubt that, Mr. Paul. You can't be building bleachers and there's no design. But is the design public?
It's right here.
It's in your phone. And can it be made public for the poor Guyanese people who are anxiously asking every day, what's going on up there? What are those bleachers for? Oh, so that's the design? No, seriously. That's an artistic drawing, my darling. Design and artistic drawings are two different things. You can do an artistic rendition of what the thing will look like. So when we did the stadium, there was an artistic rendition. However, the designs of the stadium were published, so you could see where the media house was going to be and where the bleachers were and so on. That's what we're talking about. So don't get mixed up with artistic renditions and architectural designs. I'm talking about architectural designs that the Guyanese people want to know what's going on there, what's it costing, what's it costing them, who are the contractors getting awarded, how are they getting awarded, how much is this being spent. It's an absolute phenomenal fortune. And it's a brewing scandal. So I thought the press would be interested in transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have this secret thing. You must get your people to make it public. Just like the Walter Rodney Commission report was leaked. So maybe you have to leak that too? Maybe you have to leak that too. Maybe. All right, thank you very much, everybody.